my pretties. Come in, have a seat as we sip the tea of reality. My name's Autumn,
And I'm Haley.
and this is Don't You Know?
Melvin Just and the murder of Josephine Spiegel. Big ol' trigger warning for discussions of child sexual abuse, domestic violence, human trafficking, suicide, drug use, alcoholism, and murder. Listener discretion is advised. Just Melvin, Just Evil is a self-produced documentary presented at the 2001 Sundance Film Festival by James Ronald Whitney. The documentary is a blunt look into how one man can destroy generations. Melvin Just is Whitney's grandfather who molested, raped, and abused his biological and stepchildren. He also raped and murdered Josephine Spiegel, the social worker who was trying to protect 8 of the children. James Ronald Whitney is a Wall Street broker who was compelled to investigate and expose the skeletons of his family's closet. He had a pretty tumultuous childhood, his parents having divorced when he was 9 and then his mother's many suicide attempts. He candidly admits that as a child he thought her depressive episodes were because of the divorce, but it would later be revealed that it was due to her childhood PTSD. With his maternal grandmother on her deathbed, James set out to unravel the truths of his family's generational trauma. Faye was Melvin's first wife and mother of Jeanette and Jan, twins. Getting into the background here. Was the mother of Anne, James Whitney's mother, Jim, from a prior marriage, June and Jerry, Melvin Just's and Faye's biological children. 6 kids in total now. Not much is shared about her early life. She had been married 5 times, Melvin being her second of the 5 marriages throughout her life. Elmer, her first husband, is accused of being abusive to her and the children. She sought a divorce and met Melvin. I don't know which came first, but they did happen to be really close to each other. It took 3 months for the divorce, but by the signing of the papers, Faye was already about a month pregnant with Melvin's child. In her interview, Faye would claim that she wasn't aware of the extent that Melvin was molesting her children, even though they all say that they told her about it. Then in another wheezing breath, she says that she would admit to leaving her youngest daughter in the bed naked while she went to prepare a bottle, knowing that Melvin slept naked as well. This just seems strange to me. In the documentary, the children made it pretty clear that he wasn't going to extreme lengths to hide his intentions.
Ew.
It was pretty out in the open. It was an open secret. Her daughter Jerry, I believe, it was kind of hard to keep up with who was being interviewed as I'm trying to toggle back and forth, would recall that Faye was emotionally cold. The only heat she could muster was for herself when she and her rapist husband would go out. Dressing to the nines, hair and nails all done. They couldn't touch her, don't mess with her hair or her outfit. She was prim and proper until she had a few drinks. They say that she never wore panties and that she would just spread her legs in the front yard and piss. The kids worked in the berry fields to earn money for school supplies and clothes, often playing in the old chicken coops and putting on plays. Faye says they were all good kids. There was much speculation that Melvin married Faye because she did have the young daughters. Faye remembers him fondly as a loving, caring person to the kids, but that she was his punching bag. Melvin, sick fuck, would make his molestations into games, challenges for the children to accomplish so that he could groom them. He would have them rub his back while he laid naked, and then he would roll over, pin them down, and molest them. He made the kids always be naked as well. Of course, they're kids, and they don't know any better. Whitney even asks in one interview why they would play the games. And the daughter said that she was young, she was only like 4, and she thought it was normal that all daddies played games like this with their kids. So, trigger warning for child sexual abuse. I hate to give graphic details, but if they're going to haunt me, they're going to haunt you too. Melvin would tell his daughters to stick crayons into themselves, both vaginally and anally, and report back to him how many they could fit into themselves, asking what colors and how far. Or if not crayons, then hot dogs from the store, and report back to how far they could insert it into themselves. This is gross, this is gross, this is gross. It's fucking disgusting. Not only was it a game for him, but he would pay them to let him rape them. He would offer a quarter if they would put a quarter of himself inside of them, 50 cents for half and $1 for the whole, and I'm going to vomit. In order for him to afford his heinous act, he would traffic his children to other pedophiles, saying, quote, they needed to be nice and give them good head job or spread their legs or he would take it out on them later. Unquote. All of the children have attempted suicide and struggle with various drugs and alcohol and homelessness. At the time of the documentary, one of James's aunts was living out of her truck. Honestly, as much as I appreciated this raw look into darkness, it's haunting. Watching as these victimized people speak so openly about the abuse they suffered and how it shaped their lives. I only recommend watching this documentary if you have a strong stomach. There are no reenactments, but the descriptions and conflicts are quite graphic. The victims tell their tales so candidly. In fact, they often laugh and joke with each other with a dark sense of humor. They go on to tell how Melvin didn't just prey on them. A few years of marriage, Faye would divorce Melvin, or he would divorce Faye. It wasn't quite clear who initiated all of that. But it didn't take long for him to start preying on another single mother down the road, Venice Benson. Talk about the town was that he went for her because she had many young daughters and he needed fresh hunting grounds. Obviously, it was more than just a rumor, as his stepdaughters were molested soon after he moved in. His MO was much the same, grooming them with crayons and bribing them with nickels and dimes. The children also told Venice what was happening to them at the hands of Melvin. Much like Faye, she would brush it off, preferring to live in her fantasy world than that of one of domestic abuse and child rape. She stayed with him all his life, even after the official investigations were initiated. During this time, a social worker, retired nurse, Josephine Spiegel, would be assigned to oversee the Benson Just children. It was well known by this time that Melvin was a monster, and she was set on exposing him and bringing him to justice. Unfortunately, in 1969, Josephine would fulfill the last entry in her itinerary and check on the Benson Just children. She went unannounced, interrupting Melvin while he was raping his stepdaughter Pamby. There was a bed in the living room where he was committing his evil, just before having told his other children to go into their rooms while he raped their sister. Josephine came in and told him, "I'm not going to let you hurt these Benson kids like you hurt your own," or something along those lines. This is recounted by the traumatized children that had to live through this hell. So, memories can be fuzzy, so that's the gist. Melvin got up from raping his daughter and slapped Josephine when she said she was going to call the cops. Then he took the fireplace poker and hit her in the head, slammed her into the wall, and then slammed her to the floor. The kids could hear the rip of lace and the clatter of buttons as Melvin ripped away her clothes. As they peeked into the living room, they would glance and see that he was raping her. Couldn't be sure that he was strangling her, but he was. They're all hiding as he raped and murdered Josephine Spiegel, the angel that had been sent to save them. When their mothers failed to protect them, the gruff, pipe smoking, no shit taking Josephine Spiegel came to rescue them, and this fuck took her life, then discarded her like refuse on Highway 36. The next day, the children walked into the bloody aftermath with Josephine gone. Detective Lonnie Lawson, who was assigned to the case, was convinced of Melvin's guilt. He felt that there was enough evidence to convict him. However, no one else was so convinced, though, but just did remain a person of interest, just with not enough evidence to arrest him. Years later, the case is still open, and there is enough legwork, testimony, and evidence to convict Melvin of the murder of Spiegel. But because of his age and health, California did not want to extradite him for trial. Lonnie went to see Melvin, but his neurosurgeon refused the encounter. He wanted a warrant issued for Melvin's arrest, which unfortunately never happened. Melvin died just a few weeks after the documentary finished filming. Detective Lawson is none too happy with this, and Josephine's case is officially unsolved. Despite justice being blind to Josephine's murder, it could no longer look past the heinous acts that Melvin Just committed against the innocent. He would be arrested and convicted of 12 counts of child sexual abuse, sentenced to 13 years in prison, but only serving 8. Venice would welcome him back into their lives, letting him continue his routine of raping his children and grandchildren. He stayed with him until his death in 2001.
Yes.
Very gross to know all of this and still stand by his side, to let him continue to rape grandchildren, grandnieces, granddaughters. Like, the aftermath is generations of abuse. He molested his children, and they went on to molest their children and their nieces and nephews. So many lives touched by one fuck all. So now I want to get into some quotes and memories from the kids themselves, going through the documentary and listening to them over and over recount how one man destroyed so many lives. It was difficult to see the hopelessness in their eyes. As hard as they try, they will probably never overcome what they have gone through. That is, of course, just my opinion. As we know, James has initiated a healing in his family, and he has risen above the abuse as best he can, and so has his mother Anne Marie. This documentary was a catharsis for his family, and I admire James for being the one strong enough to call his grandfather out. He seems to be doing well for himself, breaking the chains of trauma and working at healing what has been done. So kudos to you, James Whitney. You're doing great in my eyes, and many blessings to you and yours. Anyway, a look into those affected. It was a bit difficult to keep track of who everyone was during the interviews. I had to go through it a few times to get what I did. So if I messed up and attributed a quote or a memory to the wrong person, I apologize. Of course, it's not my intention to give incorrect information. However, I am only human and mistakes are bound to be made, so correct me and move along. Jim Just. Still bearing the wounds of his upbringing, laughing as he recounts the pulling of Faye's teeth, how he has to tug and wiggle three of them from her loose gums, adult teeth rotten from neglect. He once propositioned his sister to live with him as his wife so she wouldn't be homeless, saying that what goes on between consenting adults should not matter to anyone but them. He
Mm.
quotes, rude, learned behaviors. He quotes, having sex with your daughter is wrong, but there's a lot of guys that do it. As if that makes it all the difference. You know, sex with your half sister isn't as bad as murder, so, unquote. He has been taking care of Faye, their mother, for 10 years, but his sisters don't like the arrangement. He lets her drink with him even though she shouldn't be. They say it's the doctor's orders. As long as she's trying to eat, let her live, because she's dying slowly anyway. So, I mean, fuck this bitch. She could suffer because she knew about her husband molesting her children. Turned a blind eye. So, when asked how she felt about Jim wanting to have a romantic relationship with his half sister, Faye had no opinion in the matter. They could do what they want. The sisters were, of course, opposed to this on every level and refused to be alone with him. Jim couldn't do anything right in Melvin's eyes. He recalls Melvin being a handyman and remembers him fondly in one aspect, recalls making his dad's lunches. He also recalls one night when they were on vacation. Melvin was in the back of the truck, raping two of the girls. Jim tried to distract him by asking for help with sand that got in his eye. Melvin told him to shut up and go back to sleep, and he was just about 15. Faye, the mother, boldly states that Melvin killed the county nurse on Highway 36, and everyone knew it, but it just couldn't be proven at the time. She calls her youngest daughters alcoholics like her when she was younger, and doesn't really accept her responsibility of her willful ignorance. She will begrudgingly admit on her deathbed that he was a child molester, but she couldn't see it until after the divorce. Claims have gone on to the authorities, but there was no proof, so they never did anything, but yet she stayed for far too long. James Whitney. I was 5 when one of my uncles molested me. We were down in the basement where my mom made. Oh, I'm going to put that as a soundbite. Maybe. I know. I was 5 when one of my uncles molested me. We were down in the basement where my mom made apple jelly. It was really dark. He was already hard when he unzipped his pants, pulled out his penis, and asked me to play with it. I just did what he said. I was curious about everything. Why not a grown up's penis? It wasn't sexual to me, but it was sexual to him. I was just a kid. This is a quote from James himself as he recounts the first time he was molested by a family member. He quotes, I want it to serve as a wake up call to society and as a warning to those monsters like my grandfather who are still out there. He states in an interview for the New York Times. You'd think a bombshell like this explosive story would upend a young man's life. On the contrary, many of James' friends and colleagues had sympathy, pride, and admiration for him. The courage that it takes to not only open up about such familial wounds, but to record and showcase it to the world takes immense strength. We all know these types of abuses are more commonplace than they should be, and come with so many emotions. To rise above the guilt and shame of their own abuse and to use it as a teaching moment for the world, especially mothers or caregivers who ignore the cries and accusations of their children. The abuse James's mother, Anne, suffered throughout her life was the gateway to his childhood trauma. Not only was he molested as a young child, but he was also a witness to his mother's highs and lows. He was front row and center for her suicide attempts. Despite life throwing him a bag of rotten lemons, he managed to make lemonade. I can't speak to who James Whitney is, but I can say that he chose to initiate a healing of his family, undertaking the great responsibility as a young man. He is a competitive dancer on Star Search, many game shows, and went on to create many heart-moving documentaries about the darker side of life. He's such a cool dude that he had an interview in 2004 or 2005 with some newspaper. I'm not going to name because I don't want to. Tampa Bay Times or something. Anyway, the hotel where his family was staying for an HBO screening party was caught on fire, and he was sure that his family was at fault, but says that everyone was fine and that's just what mattered and paid for the damages. I guess when you're the healer in the family, you have to learn to take chaos in stride.
I have no idea. I don't think there's any healing that family.
I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. They're just going to self destruct, in my opinion, but living la vida loca. Anne, recalling a night from her childhood, coming home to see Melvin beating Faye to within an inch of her life, dragging her by the hair and threatening to drag her out and run her over with the car. And then grabbed his 12-gauge shotgun and pulled the trigger. It just clicked because it wasn't loaded. When he saw her, he took the gun and shoved her across the room. What wasn't normal for Melvin, as he was usually kind to the kids, giving them gifts for keeping quiet. She once walked in on him molesting June when she was barely 2. To me, it seemed Anne might have had a bit of survivor's guilt. She says she can't even look at her little sisters knowing how Melvin destroyed them and how her mother went along with it. She, like her siblings, has attempted suicide many times over her life, overdosing on pills, slashing her wrists in a warm bath, and even tried gassing herself with her car. She called James, who had called the paramedics, and then went on to perform on stage because he was so desensitized to his mother's cries for help. When she gave up on giving up, it was because she was visited in the hospital by James, who was furious with her. He yelled and asked why she kept doing this to him, but she said it wasn't that she was doing any of this to him, but to herself, and so the journey to healing began. She says her high IQ and curiosity to understand the inner machinations of a psychopath's mind is what led her to begin. She wanted to understand why she did the things she did and sought the answers inside herself. All of the children are intelligent in their own ways, but are burdened with the past. Jeanette does not recall him fondly, saying that she knew he didn't belong in their family, but there was nothing to do because they were children. She knew of the rumors going around that Melvin was a pervert of the worst kind, and recalls one night that her mother, Faye, and Melvin had to sleep in bed together. It was supposed to be Jeanette, Faye, Melvin, but he had gotten Faye so drunk that he had no issue slipping into the middle, and trigger warning, slipping his hand into his stepdaughter's underwear. She got out of bed screaming, "Mom, what's going on here?" Melvin acted half asleep, but mumbled nothing's going on, and her mother demanded she get back in the bed and quit fooling around. Jeanette refused, choosing to stay in the corner instead. Jan had tried to save Anne from being raped, but there wasn't much said of her throughout the documentary. Jerry was drinking and smoking all the time. Jim asked her to live with him because she's homeless and be his wife. He wants to help her. He doesn't like being lonely. She doesn't want this because she thinks it's sick. She's not done with the incest. She said their father gave them tampons to masturbate with to be ready for them, to be ready for him. June, former addict, drug dealer, alcoholic, Jim grabbed her boob out in public while she was working at an apple orchard. Was Melvin's favorite. He would tell her to experiment with her sexuality, so she went on to molest Jerry. When she recounted this, she seemed almost proud, saying that Jerry liked it and had gotten stuff all over her face. Venice, Melvin's second wife, mother to the younger daughters, all of the kids did live together at one point, trying to navigate that chaos, stayed with him until his death, told all about who he was, but ignored the accusations, was always with the kids. She wasn't out drinking and leaving them to fend for themselves, she says. Hamby, one of his stepdaughters, was born with a congenital disorder, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. She had no hip sockets or kneecaps and a club foot. She was educationally slow. She would have to wear leg braces intermittently throughout her life. Melvin raped her so badly once that he had his legs on top of hers, causing more issues for her hips. And while raping Pamby, he put Bengay on his penis and left burns inside her vagina, affecting her throughout her life. He was
Gross.
fucking great. Like I said, not just his daughters and nieces, but his granddaughters as well. His granddaughter Clarissa, he molested at 7. She alludes to it being Melvin, but doesn't clearly say. Her mother, however, denies that anything has happened to her children. She was hesitant when asked that question by James. Clarissa says she accepts and loves Melvin because he's family, that she's sad for it, that she's sad for him and can't forgive him. Josephine Spiegel, the woman that he murdered, was a retired nurse turned social worker assigned to the Just family. She was known to be more masculine, wearing men's pajamas and pants and smoking pipes, and on one fateful visit, she was interrupted Melvin raping his daughter, where he became enraged, violently raping her and strangling her, and then discarding her body like trash because he's trash. Not much is known about Melvin's early life, and I could give really two shits less. I can assume that he was probably raised in a similar environment, but that doesn't give him any fucking excuse. In 1975, Melvin Just was arrested on 12 counts of child abuse. Children did have to testify against him, and he would glare the evil eye at him. It went to the grand jury. He was found guilty and given 13 years, but only served 8, and was released in 1988 so that he could go on to molest even more people. Most of the children didn't find justice in this. During his interrogation, he was given a polygraph test. Yeah, I know it's not admissible, and it's supposed to be junk science, but it's still pretty interesting and can give some insight. Anyway, in order to be determined deceptive, you need to score -7, and Melvin scored a -16. So take that how you will. Anyway, that was a quick sip of sorrow for today. If you liked this episode, please rate and review us on all of our socials.
Don't you know, pod?
Send us email at
Don't you know, pod at outlook.com?
or visit our website.
At don'tyouknow.com.
Thanks
And,
for listening.
and don't forget to lock your door.